We are also happy, and you add to make this event a successful one. Without much ado, we have titled this An Evening with Engineer Dr. Kwame Boakye, Fellow of the Ghana Institution of Engineering, our past president. And as a division of the institution, we hold him high as one of the leading lights of our practice. And we felt that we have to have a time with him to tap into the wealth of his experience and to share some of the thoughts that he has for our practice going forward. So we want to say a big thank you to him for accepting this offer tonight to come and do this presentation for us. A brief on Dr. Boakye. Dr. Boakye has over 45 years in telecoms and ICT in roles ranging from R&D, which is research and development, to executive management. He is CEO, Echo Informatics, Chairman, Sunyani Technical University Council, the Foundation CEO, BCN in Nigeria, Chairman, Talent Solutions, and Director, Associated Consultants. Previous positions include VP and CTO, Harris Corporation, and AT&T Paradigm in the US. Member, Technological Advisory Committee of the US FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, the Florida Research Council, and various university industry boards, consultant, UN agencies, and Lucent Technology, Senior Lecturer and Head, Computer Science, University of Ghana. That's a new one. I didn't know that Doctor had headed the Computer Science Department at University of Ghana. He provides advisory services in corporate governance, strategic planning, mergers and alliances, and intellectual property. So without much ado, we want to welcome Dr. Kwame Boakye, our speaker for this evening. Please, let's welcome him with a hand clap so that we will be out the others. Thank you very much, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer Robert. Obviously, the battle between the virtual and the real, the virtual is winning, you know. And clearly, why endure the traffic of Accra if you can do the same thing from your living room? You know, so that's what we are seeing. Yeah, when Engineer Robert called me to basically talk about my career, I sat down, thought about it, and I said, these are really reflections. And I call my, the title of my presentation is Reflections of an Engineer from the World of the Spirits. And the world of the spirits, because those of us who have served as presidents and moved on, we're in a slightly different world, you know, from where periodically we rise to bless what is being done, you know, in the physical world. And in fact, Engineer, who is the immediate past, he is in the world of the living dead. He's sort of transitioning from the real world to the world of the spirits. Come next year, you'll join us in the world of the spirits. Anyway, this is my intention is really to give some perspective on what I have experienced as an engineer, you know, but to set the context, I'll talk a little bit about what I call engineering in society. After all, that's what I have operated in, and that's what I will continue to operate in. So let's say a little bit about the engineering discipline, and then engineering and development and so on. I won't spend too much time there because I actually have a whole presentation that talks about that. But it's just to set the context. Then I'll get into, talk, what have I been through all these years? My life, at least as I see it, try to share some of the insights with you, from my humble beginnings of Ashtown in Kumasi, to, the corporate plane in Harris, so I've seen a few things in between. And very importantly, spend some time to what lessons have I learned? Really, this is the so what for other people, given what I've been through, what are some of the things that I have seen, so that it can help, particularly the younger ones. And I do these things and actually spend quite a bit of time in the institution because I'm of a firm belief that you must go to your grave empty. You must empty out before you go. It doesn't serve anybody any useful purpose, the things that you carry with you. So as much as possible, let us all try to empty ourselves before we go. Then, of course, I'll make some concluding remarks, and hopefully we'll have quite a bit of time for questions and answers, because I'm sure some of the things I say, people have questions, people may have different perspectives, Yes, please. So let's look at the engineering and society, and I'll briefly look at, when we say engineering, at least a functional definition of what and how does engineering relate to science, technology, and innovation. We bandy these things around, but at least I'll set a context. And what is the role of engineering development, and what are some of the different disciplines? And you will notice, in fact, I'll come back in and talk a little bit about our current constitution. One of the things that drove us to our current constitution is the rapid changes in the engineering. Engineering, as I studied it, it's not the same as the engineering that the current generation is going to. Many of the things today didn't exist then. In fact, I do remember that even computer science didn't exist. It was struggling somewhere between mathematics and electrical engineering. So there have been quite a number of changes, and yeah, even newer disciplines. And every day, because of applications and so on, we are seeing newer and newer disciplines in engineering. Next, please. Everything starts with science. Science is really nothing more than a system to build and organize knowledge in a form that is testable. I mean, that's a key word. It must be testable. And it can be used to make predictions about nature or the universe. So it's basic knowledge. It doesn't have to have any use. It's out of curiosity. We want to understand, nature. We want to understand whether it serves any useful purpose. That's secondary. Okay. So out of science, typically, we fashion tools to solve specific problems and so on. And that's what technology is. Okay. So from science, we build tools, and those tools give us technology. Then, tools are very confined. When you look at a whole problem and you are trying to solve a problem that is useful to society, that's where engineering comes in. Okay? So engineering is really the science and art of applying scientific and mathematical principles, judgment, and very importantly, common sense to create, maintain, sustain, develop, and apply technology for the needs and desires of society. And I go through all of this because I'll be talking a lot about engineering. When I say engineering, technology and science are implied. Okay, so I don't always have to say science, technology, Really, the useful part of all this triad is engineering, because engineering is the one that is solving the problems that are useful to the society. Okay, so it is important to keep that in mind. And then innovation. Innovation is what allows us to be creative about how we approach solutions. If we are even building the tools in technology, we can have innovation. Okay, so innovation helps us to tie all of these together. And innovation is really the kind of thing that when we say we are thinking out of the box, that's innovation. And you remember that in engineering, we used to talk about using brute force method. That's not innovation. Okay? If you are using that's, so innovation is giving you this new insight, sort of neat way. And sometimes, in some of the maths problems, I had a professor who walk back and say, come on, isn't that beautiful? We just look at the solution. And indeed, sometimes the solution is elegant. That's innovation. Okay. So from now on, if I talk of engineering, assume that I'm really talking of science, technology, and engineering. Okay. Engineering is very pervasive because it solves problems. From the time you wake up in the morning till the time you go to bed, practically everything that you touch is engineering. You wake up in the morning, you turn on the faucet, you wash your face, you get into the shower, the water flows, you warm, some food with maybe your microwave oven, you have a kettle, you get dressed, get on the road, all these pothole roads, they're still engineering, even if they are not, perfect or even pleasant. They're still engineering. You get to the office, you switch on your computer, or if you are in the market, maybe you turn on your calculator or something, But the point is that engineering is pervasive. In fact, the world without engineering could not exist. The modern life is so dependent on engineering, that next slide. Next. Is very dependent on engineering. And indeed, the modern socio-economic development is inextricably linked with engineering. And typically, you need sort of training and so on. And that's what I call the TVET, the technical and vocational education and training. You need training to sustain it. You can't just be sitting at one place. Okay. So the development of the world is really very closely tied to engineering and then training, in engineering. And if you doubt it, all you have to do is take a look at, some of the recently developed, countries, like Singapore, Korea, Malaysia, and so on. They have managed to combine, engineering, training, and all of that to essentially, move them into, much higher stages of development. And we have moved from the days of, let me call it sort of the brute force, manufacturing and so on, to where knowledge, a lot of things are based on knowledge, no longer just putting up huge factories and so on. The value really has moved to the knowledge. And in the process, unfortunately, they have left us behind. The contrast between us. In fact, everybody will tell you Korea and Ghana used to be the same, but now we are worlds apart. And this is what leads me to say that any nation that ignores engineering has essentially given up hope of saving its people. And indeed, that nation, in my humble opinion, is going nowhere. Cannot move forward without engineering. And a good example, the recent, COVID. Basically, what we had to do was mobilize, engineering and it to be able to cope with COVID. And we are working our way out. In fact, this presentation is an example. 2 years ago, this room would have been full. Now, most of us are actually, virtual, and part of it is also the training. So now we have to acquire new skills. We have to learn new things, and it's beginning to, change the world. Next, please. Now, another thing that we observe is that in the last few decades, there's been an explosion in, technologies. And the so-called, in fact, the so-called new and emerging technologies. And please go to the next chart and then come back to this. And you have technologies such as, robotics, the drones, nanotechnology, and so on and so forth. All these technologies, please go back to the other chart. All these technologies are actually beginning to change the way the world works. And they're beginning to change competitiveness on the international, level. And if you look at the difference between the so-called the North and the South, it is really the application of these technologies that is defining the North versus, the South. And they are really changing economies, and many of their institutions are actually beginning to, apply these technologies, so that they can get greater value. The interesting thing about these technologies is that they are actually on the side of the beginner. What I mean by the beginner is one who has nothing deployed. And the reason is very simple. When we do financial analysis, there's this concept, return on investment. When we invest something, we want to get a certain return on it. Otherwise, it is not a good project. And that concept actually constrains the haves. If you have nothing, there is nothing to get a return on. You can start anew. And this is what makes these technologies so great for, the, as it were, the have-nots, And this is why we should be taking, active interest, And in fact, a good case in point is the cell phone. In fact, we use the cell phone in more creative ways than the advanced countries. Why? Because we had nothing. Today, we are not likely to go and build, a wired-based network. We will start with, wireless, or if we must do wire-based, it's likely to be optics, not copper. Okay, so we have that advantage. For us, if you have invested for many, many years in your copper plant, you don't just get up one day and pull it out and throw it out. So it becomes a constraint for them, which is not a constraint for us. So we have the ability, to move much faster and, as they say, leapfrog, over, the existing solutions. But there's a catch. There's a caveat. You can't just get up and say, I've got a new technology. It's got to be organized to take advantage of these new technologies. And organized means you have to have policies. You have to have deployment schemes. You have to have strategies as to how you are going to actually bring in these new, technologies. So you cannot enjoy these new technologies if you are not organized. So that is a caveat. And in fact, the challenge for a lot of us has been trying to get organized. Next, please. Move on to the next one. In all these new technologies, there's one technology that stands out distinctly, and that is ICT. And why is ICT? Because if you look at all these new technologies, they are enabled by ICT. Okay. And also ICT by itself is a technology, for example, all these communication stuff that we are using, ICT is changing the world. So that is one area that we need to pay a lot of attention to. Fortunately, you don't have to spend huge amounts of money. A big part of it is knowledge. And again, if you're organized, you can take advantage of that kind of knowledge. But for ICT, probably couldn't have survived COVID. Life continued largely because of ICT, and continues today because of that. And in fact, if you doubt the connection between ICT and wealth, look at the Forbes. Almost all the top people, the richest people in the world, they all have something to do with ICT. So that tells you. Next, please. Now, just a quick look at the engineering disciplines. Once upon a time, the world was very simple. And you had chemical, you had civil, you had electrical, and you had mechanical. Finito. Now, all of a sudden, there are all these other, engineering disciplines. Somebody says systems engineering, there is robotic engineering, nanotech, all kinds of engineering. But most of it can sort of be organized around these basic four. And in fact, when we looked at the Constitution, one of the things was, how do you, put people into these four categories? If we are saying we have only 4 disciplines in engineering, we throw out a lot of engineers today. Okay. So one of the things was to look at how do you reconcile the two. But if you look at the Constitution, there is a concept of the subdivision. So under these high-level divisions, you can create subdivisions, and there are requirements. You can't just get up one day and say, I'm a one-person subdivision. No, because the whole idea is that you have to grow, feed on each other. There has to be leadership and so on. So the new Constitution allows us to maintain the old while moving into the future. So that's the concept of the disciplines. But what we find is that number one, this will continue to change. Very dynamic. Engineering is a very dynamic, field. And the thing that you also find is that many of the new, fields relate to electrical engineering. Many of the new fields, relate to electrical engineering. Somehow either electrical engineering or electrical engineering combination with some of the others. But electrical engineering tends to dominate in the new and emerging areas of engineering. Be it as it may, what is even more important is the fact that increasingly engineering is becoming very multidisciplinary. If you want to solve problems in engineering, you can just put on a very narrow view. Today, if you are road, you need people from other disciplines to come to be able to solve that problem. And That is probably a lot more significant than whether you are electrical, civil, and so on and so forth. And in fact, today, we interviewed, some potential new members, and I learned so much about geomatic engineering. And I must confess, I was completely ignorant. I mean, listening to them, I really, really reduced my level of ignorance. I mean, and it was a very fruitful day, because they have been close to the surveyors and so on. I think a lot of us didn't realize the engineering import of that discipline. And I think today, I got my eyes open, and I think the other people also did. Next, please. Now let's look at my engineering career. And in going through that, I will look at things like, how do you prepare yourself for an engineering career? What are the career options as you move, in the field? And how do you manage an engineering career? Okay, so I hope to touch on some of those next. And I have broken this into stages. First, what I call the preparation, which is, the education, the practical training. Then the early years as a, a professional. And in my case, the early years were primarily research and development. Then, in the early years, typically you'd be an individual contributor. Those were the times when, if I put out a solution and I did not see all these fancy equations, I was disappointed, But I remember at one point I had a boss who looked me in the face and said, Kwame, and pardon my language, cut out the shit and design telephones. I mean, so there's a certain mind change that you go through, at different stages in your life. Then my mid-career. And the mid-career is really when you start getting into technical management, the beginnings of technical management. And I'll say quite a bit about that. Then you move into corporate management. Corporate management, this is when you are in the executive suites, and where, in fact, you don't talk about equations. You talk about money, return on investment, earnings per share, and that's, you have to translate your engineering to those things, for you to be relevant, now, on your other side, you got to be talking to your engineers about technical things. So you really have to straddle, these two worlds. Then, leader of startup, enterprises. Again, I'll talk about that. My experience in, Nigeria, and then my experience, starting a consulting company, here. Then finally, to me, I think, the greatest, you work all of this so that can be of service to the profession and society. And again, I'll say a little bit about the things that I have been, doing there. And I see that journey as you acquire capabilities so that you can add value to society. All these things that you are doing, ultimately, you have to be able to add value to society. So let us look at the preparation. I started my engineering life, so to speak, at Kumasi St. Joseph's Boys School. Saito. Those days, of course, everybody, we all used to go to school without wearing shoes, and and everybody who lived in Ashanti Newtown went to either St. Joseph's Boys School, or they went to state, school, which used to be called Division School. And we had this head teacher, Master Say, was very inspirational to us. And And I remember that he was the head teacher of the primary section. And Master Say would be enjoying his rice water with Jacob's cream crackers. And he would take a bite of his Jacob's cream crackers and get a scoop of the rice water and look at us and say, you know, so it was clear to us that we had to be aiming high so that we could enjoy this rice water in Jacob's cream crackers. You know, and in fact, one of my classmates, Philip, we went to the US together. And when we got there, our aim was to buy the biggest box of Jacob's cream crackers and donate to Master Say. Unfortunately, he didn't live long enough for that, so we couldn't do that. But, it stuck, And then, I used to be the office boy, those days, do errands for the head teacher and so on. And I remember one time, he always used to wear white, white long sleeves, and then, the white shorts, and then they used to have these, hoses, with a, pen. Oh, yeah. So Master was trying to fix his cufflinks for the white shirt, and he was struggling, so he asked me to help him fix the cufflinks. And then when I put the cufflinks in, he looked at my face and said, "Which is a criteria for?" so that was Master. Yeah, very colorful. But those days, St. Joseph's used to have about 3 or 4 kids going to Achimota School every year. From that place. And then you have some going to, for about half of the class will go to Opokwari, because for the Catholic school and the feeder school, so typically after Form 2, they would have to essentially, admit a whole new set of kids, because almost everybody went to secondary school, And when I think about that and compare to today, we have gone back. How many Saito schools, can do something like that? Maybe these are the things that we should be thinking about as we think of how to move the nation forward. But I believe my real transformation was at Achimota School. That's where, that's what linked me to the world. Yes, Achimota School was really, really what made me, what I am today. And I feel no shame at all in admitting that, And for that, I am. I see. You can't get away with this. Okay, let me. Okay, turn these things off. So, yeah. That is what my major transition was. And going through O-level, A-level, and because of that, I've become a fanatic of the boarding school system. Sometimes we complain that the boarding school system is too expensive. But I maintain that is probably the most cost-effective. That's the reason why we are not killing each other in this country. It is not because we are better than our neighbors. It is really the boarding school system that has saved Ghana as a nation. And we need to take education and security together. And if you do that, what you find is that our education budget is not, at all high. Obviously, if you take it by itself, you get a different view. But combine it with our national security. What else would we be doing if we didn't make that kind of investment, And certainly for me, it has worked. And I think many people in Ghana will tell you, about the same, thing. With respect to engineering, when you were in the sixth form, we had this group that we used to call a fearsome foursome. And it consists of Engineer Sarioboa was one of them. Otios Rebo, the Jabin, he was also one of the fearsome, and then another guy. And why do we call ourselves fearsome? Because we so believed that we were so good in mathematics that mathematics problems were afraid of us. We scared mathematics problems. I thought this. We were so confident in our ability to do maths that we were convinced that all these math problems were afraid of us. And those days, the textbook that we used, they used to mark the hard problems with daggers, So we would intentionally go out and look for these dagger problems. And sometimes you have a whole section, which would be a dagger, and a dagger within a dagger. So those were the problems that we went for, And later in life, I reflected, on that class, that engineering class, it was called then, that engineering class. And I've been to a lot of schools because I used to recruit for Columbia. And I said to myself, really, to be difficult to find, we're 19 in that class. And I don't believe that it would have been easy for you to find 19 kids who were probably that good. And that was the quality of education in Ghana at the time. And I'm sure other schools, Fanspim, all those, I'm sure they also had their own fearsome foursome. Maybe they didn't call them that, but they had their fearsome foursome. And again, you ask, how did we lose all of that? Maybe these are some of the things we need, to reflect on. Then I went to Columbia, and it wasn't a planned thing. I went to Columbia by accident. I never sat down and said, I want to go to Columbia University. Probably hadn't even heard of it. What happened was that they had this program they used to call African Scholarship Program for American Universities, ASPAL. And they advertised in the papers. And we just decided, what the heck, let's go and apply. Those days we were convinced that it would go nowhere. Because if the scholarship secretariat didn't know your parents, so we're convinced, but hey, life, you've got to take chances. So we applied. Then they asked us to come and take some exams. We went, but again, it didn't really pay much. In fact, our classmates used to make fun of us, that we're wasting our time at the secretariat. So they used to call it secretariat, Then one of us got a letter that he had been then we went for interviews. They invited us to go for interviews. Then one of us got a letter saying he had been admitted to this school in the US. So I said, hey, so maybe there's something to this thing, Then next came, Dr. Cruikshank, that some of you may know. He got admission to Berkeley. He had never applied to Berkeley. Then I get this letter that I'd been admitted to Columbia. So now I had to go and find out about, Columbia, in New York. So anyway, we went, and there were 14 of us from Ghana at the time who were on that scholarship program. But there were, I think, about 200 and something Africans altogether. And the plane that took us there, it was like a trot plane. It started from Southern Africa, taking us, up as it came along. And we went to Nigeria to join the Nigerian group, But it took us to Boston. And we landed in Boston. And early in the morning, And those days, that was when they were trying to build the overhead at a circle, Nkrumah Circle overhead. And it had taken them such a long time. And then you go to the US and all these interchanges, flyovers and so on. Hey, then you look at this and say, hey, this place is developed, bro. And then they put us in the airport, and they had these automatic doors, which of course we had never seen before. And some of us were rushing to go, and then we're falling down, And I always used to, say to myself, I wonder the immigration officers and the customs officers, when they went home that evening, I wonder the conversation at dinner table, But anyway, so we went for orientation. There was this place called Experiment in International Living in Putney, Vermont. So by buses, they took us there for orientation before going to school. And they gave us some pocket money. And those days, they had these socks called Esquire socks, with the colors. And then we had, sneakers, canvas shoes and T-shirts. And we're looking so cool, And one of, in fact, it was Dr. Cruikshank, who said, you guys with funny names, don't follow me, But for you guys, everybody would think I was American, Then they had a barbecue. And can you imagine being given, almost a whole half piece of chicken? In those days, the only time I had chicken was Christmas Day. And then they give you some meat. And I had the whole half piece, So you look at each other and say, hey, have a do. So anyway, so they took us through this orientation so that I guess we wouldn't appear too green when we got to school. Then they paired us up with families. We stayed with these families for about a week or two, again, before going to school, generally in the area where you were going to school. And interestingly, at the time, I was the only person who had a Black family as a host family, And I really have kept up with them up to today. Yes, one of the kids at that time, he's now a very famous sports medicine doctor in the UK, and in fact, I expect him to come and visit me in Ghana sometime, soon. Unfortunately, the parents have passed on, but I still maintain, contact with them, and they become sort of part of my, family. So they were my host family holidays. I'd go visit them. So Colombia. First, you go to Colombia, and they tell you there is no way you can get a degree from Colombia without being able to swim 4 lanes of the pool. You will go swimming every morning until you pass. Fortunately, again, for Achimota, I had a lot of hair start, so it wasn't quite as torturous. But I had this Nigerian friend. He winter every morning, he would go swimming, so, Then, of course, those days, I was about the only Black person in almost all my classes, And I say this with some sadness, because being the only, we should not wear it as a mark of, accomplishment. As a matter of fact, wherever we are, we should strive to get other people, to come there, saying I'm the only one, and no, I don't think that should be seen as, a mark of distinction. In fact, to be able to say I brought these other people, that is what is a mark of, distinction. Then, of course, they could not. I wanted to take some of the hard, courses, and then they was okay. Oh, the physics and maths, and the dean was saying, we don't want you to suffer too much, please, go easy, And I said, no, this is, and this is the confidence that we had coming from Ghana, because you didn't see any reason why not. But the thing that killed a lot of us is that we were relatively ignorant. In the American system, they have what they call the liberal arts education, and everybody must go through it. And in Colombia, they call it the core curriculum. I had to take what they call contemporary civilization, which is the history of Western civilization, the humanities. And I probably read more books in one semester than I did my whole, secondary school career. So there was a lot of that part. We struggled when it came to physics and stuff like that. We were, Then in New York, every weekend I had to go to the museum. Every weekend, visit a museum, describe a painting, and I used to go to the dean and say, but I'm here to do engineering. And then he'll respond that, but we are here to educate you, And I said, what has all this mean? He said, come on, we can't afford to allow you to drown because of 4 lengths of the pool with all the investment that we are making in you. At the time, it didn't make us, but now I look back and I say, we ought to be having standards like that, and particularly when I started paying tuition for my own children. Of course, I don't want them to drown because of 4, lengths of the pool, So Colombia was also a real, really good experience. And fortunately for me, the first semester, despite all the challenges, I finished at the top of my class. And, I didn't really see it as a big deal, but it was a big deal, and particularly for an African, because they didn't expect that you come and be able to do, So that changed, some of the, mentalities. And in fact, the dean of engineering came to me and asked me, are there any kids from your school that you recommend to come here? So every year we used to have somebody from Achimota school come into Colombia, for quite a number of years, and in fact, Pipra, he was in the at Colombia, and if you know the late Udunton, so with the UN, was also part of the Achimota to Colombia, trail. I did my undergraduate in electrical engineering, and interestingly enough, the Aspire scholarship, it claimed that we were going to do courses which were not available at KNUST. So they listed a number of courses, and electronics was one of them, and that's what I picked. That's why I went there. But of course, once you get there, the options, the opportunities, you begin, to take advantage of what exists, over there. My undergraduate years, I was fortunate to have met this professor who taught me networks, Professor Wing, the Chinese, Chinese, and we hit it off. So I became like his assistant. I did programming for him, and he helped me a lot. In fact, when I went to graduate school, I became his graduate research assistant, and he was my thesis supervisor. So I built a relationship, with him. And I say these things because, mentoring is very important. Professor Wing helped me a lot, to see what the options were, and also, financially, because for my master's, I was fortunate to get a fellowship, so I didn't need, and the Aspire program, we were supposed to finish our first degree and come back home. Obviously, those guys must have been smoking something. You don't take brilliant young people to the US and expect that they will not aspire, higher. So in fact, I think they considered the program a failure because a lot of us didn't come back, immediately. Fortunately, there were 3 components of the scholarship. the school gave you tuition. And in fact, for the most part, the school was what you dealt with. Then they had a USAID, which provided your living allowance, and then the African American Institute was the coordinator, and the African American Institute, I guess, didn't show enough success, because they didn't ship us back home, and some of us actually are, still there. I must say I was very strongly influenced by New York City. Columbia is in New York. And my first day, my first few days on campus, for the first time in my life, I could go for a whole day without seeing a single familiar face. And you see all the thousands and thousands, but not a single one that I recognize. And it was a very eerie feeling, and now when I look back, it's something. Anyway, all this phase was really to build what I call a solid foundation. The St. Joseph's, Achimota School, Columbia, all that was to build a solid foundation. Next, please. I'll come back and change my name to Jack Jones or something like that. And I remember going to tell my boss, a nice Japanese gentleman, that I was planning to go home. And he was really disappointed. He said, "Oh, why? Don't we pay you enough? And I mean, you have such a good career, and why would you leave that?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, I need to go home, And he said, "Well, I can't tell you what to do, but if you ever decide that you want to come back, just let me know, and I'll be quite happy, to get you back, here." And I remember saying to myself at the time, who is coming back? Who is coming back? And of course, you don't know what you don't know. This is what life is all about. So I came to Ghana. At the time, that was when computer science was starting, and I had always been in sort of the lighter side of electrical engineering, networks, data networking and stuff like that, and I had decided that, I don't know why, but I didn't want to go to KNUST, that, and I wanted to, go to Legon. Then I remember, Father Costa, well, some of you may have heard of, was a physicist, a Catholic priest who used to track these satellites when we were in secondary school. So you're a very impressive guy. So I wrote to him and said I wanted to, and he encouraged me to apply. And one of the things I remember is that the application forms were in 6 copies. So I filled one and I made photocopies and sent them, and I added a note that I presume that photocopying is very expensive. That's why you're asking me to fill this 6 times. So Costa later said when he got that, he laughed and said, "This is the kind of person we need in this place." So anyway, I came to Legon. Legon was an eye-opener. The Oxford and the Cambridge. And in fact, if you ever walked into those days into the meeting with Professor Dixon, and all these guys, you would think you probably were somewhere in the UK, I mean, so that was the nature of, Legon. And, I was a young man, and I think, the US sort of teaches you to maybe be a little more forward than usual. So the Department of Computer Science, when we were starting, the mathematics, Professor Champon and co, their view of computer science was that do mathematics and take programming, and that's computer science, which of course I resisted. And they wanted to push all their, lower students to the department. And I refused to take anybody. So I was reported to the VC. GhIE was the VC then. I said, Mr. VC, you give him a job to do, give me time to do it, and if I don't, fire me. And then he started laughing, So it's okay. Now, that year, I went recruiting. And I think probably that was the first time anybody in Legon, had gone recruiting. Not like these days. Now they actively recruit. And it was good for me because I got to know the country. People didn't know about computer science. So I visited all these secondary schools, in the north, in the Volta region and so on, to tell them what computer science was. So that year, we got such a good intake of students. Because those days, Legon, if you had aggregate 12, that was high for Faculty of Science, And suddenly we're getting people with 9, 8, and so on, Then, of course, the mathematics people, they started complaining that, as for you, you want only the top students. And then we went to the VC, and the VC said, but that's what we should all be doing, Then, the thing that I was fortunate with is that we started computerizing the processes and procedures at Legon, even though we had this IBM 1130, very primitive, But the student projects, we computerized admissions, we computerized, the exams results and so on. And as a result, I became very, very friendly with the registry. Lecturers used to constantly complain about the registry. I never had a problem with it because I organized courses for them to take called, Introduction to Computing, to make them aware so that all the projects we were doing, they would be able to take advantage, of those projects. Then the university works on committees, which I learned very quickly. So I joined quite a number of the committees, and I found out which were the powerful committees. And the thing that you also find is that a lot of people don't want to work, but at the time I was young and energetic and I had a few dollars in my pocket, so I didn't need to run it around as much. And we needed, for example, a space for a department. Nobody will give us space. And at ISE, and then the Regional Institute of Population, they had all these empty rooms. And you go there and they'll give you all kinds of reasons why not. They couldn't give you the rooms. So I got myself through the finance committee onto the board of ISE. When I got there, they came and asked me, did I need space? Because there were 4 of them who were competing for directorship, and they all wanted, So this is the way, you have to sort of understand how things work, and then play the game, accordingly. And I remember Professor Korte, very fine gentleman, chemistry, And I think I used to frustrate him in the beginning because, he'll say, and I'll say something. Because we had computerized the stuff, I was forced to learn the regulations very, very closely. So he said something and nobody would ever challenge him. After a while, I said, this guy. So occasionally I say, Prof, it doesn't quite say that. It says this. He tolerated me for a while. And then one day just blew up and said, young man, this is the way we have been running the university. And I don't know what happened. I said, Professor Korte, there's something called progress. And everybody started laughing, But anyway, I loved teaching at Legon. It was a very, very good experience. But Ghana was very hard at the time. This was the Kalabule days, and when you were teaching, students were wondering whether they would be able to have lunch. Their minds would be elsewhere. So after a while, I said, look, let me take some time off, go to the US for a year or two, and come back. So of course, I ate my words and called my former boss and said, hey, I want to come back. So sure, so they arranged. The thing that hit me was that when I got back, I had essentially become illiterate. After 5 years in Ghana, I had become illiterate. You know, I was so far behind in my field. You know, those days we didn't have the internet and all of these things, you know, and even though I was the Oga here, I was essentially illiterate. The thing that saved me was that my boss then and his boss were people that I had mentored before leaving. So their view of me was a view of their mentor. If they had really known where I truly was, I mean, they might not have tolerated me, you know. So I was in the library all the time, you know, continuously, you know. So I was able to catch up, you know. Now, the thing that I say is that professionally, I lost a lot of ground. But in terms of personal development, I gained a lot, you know, by, you know, coming to Lagos. You know, America almost encourages self-indulgence. Ghana has no tolerance whatsoever for self-indulgence. And you begin to look at yourself differently when you are here, you know. In America, there's no, you know, elderly person, you know, there's no, but in Ghana, you know, people regard you differently. You know, suddenly you see yourself as part of, you know, leading the society, guiding the society. It is not so. When you can be in America for a very long time, but it's very difficult to get to that stage where you see yourself, you know, in that role. So that was a very, very helpful, you know, experience that I had. And it was a time that we started things like the Computing Association of Ghana and blah, 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 you know. So all of this really was in my performance as an individual contributor. You know, most of this, I didn't have too many, except Legon, of course. I had a whole department that I was running. And when I went back to Bell Labs, that was the time that AT&T was being divested. We were breaking up, you know, AT&T. And I was fortunate to have actually been right in the center. You know, so all the things that were going on, the regulations, the court cases, and if I was part of a group that had been put together to essentially, you know, preach the beauty of a unified AT&T. And our slogan was one AT&T and it works, meaning leave it alone, you know. Now, I must confess that I'm embarrassed every time I think about that. Because without the breakup of AT&T, we would not have the kind of dynamic, you know, environment in the telecom that we have today. You know, and later on, I will talk a little bit, you know, about that. Please. So my mid-career, the next was to become a manager, you know, so a lower level manager, you know, and so on. This was still at Bell Labs. I was promoted to what was called technical manager. And then I moved on to AT&T Paradigm. And the move was instigated by a couple of things. One, I had been spending a lot of time in data networking, you know. Bell Labs was a place for geniuses. You know, almost everybody there was in the top 10%, you know, of his class. Unfortunately, people don't have experience from anywhere else. So we all get molded into thinking, you know, the same way. I remember during my first few years, we had this, you know, center meeting, you know, and people would be talking about how you can drop a phone from the top of Empire State Building and you drop it and you pick it up and it will still work. You know, and in my innocence, I asked the question, but what's so great about that? My boss was scandalized and said, telling our vice president, he's new here, meaning, you know. So when I look back and see how AT&T has fallen, it's exactly because of that kind of thinking, you know, that they had all these great minds, but they didn't, in fact, most of the people who thought differently left. And many of the people who started in Silicon Valley, almost all of them had their beginnings in, AT&T Bell Labs. So this is what the things that you see. Next one, please. So in Paradigm, I started and I continued my management. Then Paradigm, AT&T bought this company, called Paradigm, which did data networking. Paradigm used to build the modems. These days nobody even knows about modems. The modems, and then we built this DSL, the ADSL, stuff, originated from Paradigm, and it came from, observing that the network was getting more and more digital, except for the, the last mile, so to speak. So there were technologies that we could take advantage of. I went to Paradigm as an individual contributor, and in fact, I was on loan to Paradigm from Bell Labs. So I left my house, and everything was in New Jersey. Then after the first year, the president of the unit asked me to stay on. Then after the second year, he said, look, I don't want you to go back. I will promote you. Okay. So then that started my rise to, higher management. But it wasn't long after that. Then, Lucent, they had all kinds of, and they sold Paradigm. And I tell people that, I was sold. I sold companies on one side, and I was sold to, a venture capital group, called the Texas Pacific Group. They bought Paradigm. And, they brought a totally different orientation. Up to that point, I had revered technology. These guys were about bottom line. In fact, as soon as they bought Paradigm, they sold off all the assets and leased back. So they made their money in almost no time, And the thing that I really learned from them was they put me onto their due diligence team, because they were buying companies all over the place. They had a Paradigm, they had a shoe factory in Mexico, they had a farm in Brazil, that all this portfolio. And to them, everything boiled down to what is the return on investment, earnings per share. That's why I learned, hard business, because they really didn't, everything was fungible. They didn't care about the beauty of technology, which I had revered, up to that point. That's when I started losing my innocence, when I spent time, those guys. And the attitude was really, So after a while, I decided I was going to go back to New Jersey, to the old AT&T family, the Lucent family, partly because so that I could bridge my service. Because then, when this company, the recruiter called me and said, oh, we have this opportunity, go take a look. And for a while, I didn't bother, because I was working for the vice president of Bell Labs, together with Carly Fiorina, who used to be the CEO for HP. Yeah, and but she grew up in Ghana. Yes. She grew up in Ghana. Yes, she grew up in Ghana. So I used to be sort of the link between them, and my job was to help accelerate the introduction of technology into products. So by one day I said, okay, what the heck? Let me go find out what these people are about, because we were based in Florida. So I went and they talked, because this was Harris Corporation. I had always thought of Harris Corporation as a government business, where they do all kinds of secret stuff. So I wasn't particularly interested. But then I went, and when I talked to them, it looked like they wanted to change the face of the company. So they said, well, why don't you go check it out? So I said, okay, I'll go, visit and see. So when I went there, talked to them, and I called my wife and said, dear, they are no longer going to New Jersey. And she said, what? What are you talking about? I said, I went for this visit to Harris. And in fact, they have invited all of us to visit them at some point. So we went. Then, of course, she agreed with me that we were no longer going to New Jersey. So I went to Harris. When I went to Harris, I was in one of the sectors. They had 4 sectors. Then after a while, they decided that they will merge all of them into a unified company. And so I moved from being the vice president of one of the sectors to becoming the corporate vice president for technology. So in that position, I had over 4,000 engineers working for me all around the globe, in different countries, in France, Austria, UK, Brazil, India, and so on and so forth. There, the job was a little different. As I said, there were 2 sides to the job. Because on the one hand, you had to make sure that your engineers were motivated, and excited about technology to work. On the other hand, you had to convince the investors that you are making good use of their money, for the, kinds of things that you're doing in technology. And I used to be part of the corporate review. Every quarter, in the US, companies meet Wall Street, to talk about your performance, then your stock can go up or down. And, and before then, I hadn't paid attention to such things. But then, I had to start, and that was when, I started actually seeing the insights of the corporate executive, rooms. And a big part of Harris's business was government. So I used to go to, the Pentagon quite a bit, and, these old soldiers are pretty conservative. And one of the things you find is that anytime you're losing the argument, they would more or less say, where are you from? Anyway, where are you generally from? I mean, and essentially say that if you think you are so great, go fix that place. And that always stuck with me. And there is some truth to that. We need to fix our place. Otherwise, they're not going to gain, respect, from anybody. Please, next. So that really was my, experience in the executive management. We had a corporate plane, and for the last thing, there was a corporate coup d'etat, so to speak. My boss, the guy who recruited me, was a CEO, the chief operating officer. Very, very savvy marketing guy. But the CEO was not so good in marketing, but a wonderful operations guy. We go to do a business review, and within 10, 15 minutes, you get to the essence of what is happening, in that unit. He was that good. But it's not, unfortunately, the COO, of course, marketing people tend to be a little, so he couldn't wait for this guy to retire. This guy had only 2 years to retire. So he was sort of undermining him, At the same time, the numbers didn't look very good. So I believe, in one of the board meetings, he brought the loads on him. And this guy was fired, the CEO. And practically everybody he brought into the company was sacked. And I was one of the few who survived, because in fact, the CEO called me and said, look, this is what is going on, but I want you to know that we want you to stay. And part of it was because I always, even though the CEO recruited me, I always thought of the company. And in fact, I had a few occasions in which his name was Van. I said, Van, you ought to slow down. You don't seem to appreciate, what Phil was the CEO, brings, because Phil was a really good operations guy, But anyway, so I survived that one. Then at Harris, we started doing business with Nigeria. In fact, I was able to, the sales team, the marketing team, they came to me and showed me a business plan for, Nigeria. And I said, oh, this seems very attractive. I was able to persuade the company to go and invest in Nigeria. I tell people that if I knew then what I know now, I wouldn't have done it. Now, fortunately for me, it worked out beautifully. The business did very well. But what would happen is that every quarter, when we're about to face the analysts, we needed the results to show the analysts. So they would ship me off to Nigeria to go talk to those people so we could collect money. So I got to know quite a few of the top people in Nigeria. And in conversations, there's a group which had a license to build a fiber optic network in Nigeria. They didn't have the expertise, but they had the contacts and so on. So the long and short of it is they persuaded me to join them. I took an early retirement from Paris, and then off to Nigeria. This is how I ended up in Nigeria to start the backbone connectivity, network. So I was the first CEO. Actually, I built the company, from scratch. And in Harris, as I've said before, most of my job was about managing R&D. I did intellectual property. I did all the things that the heads of engineering do, standards, ITU, and all of these. I spent a lot of time, But one of the things was that I had about 10 lawyers in my organization, because I did intellectual property. And, again, lawyers, you never go to a lawyer to ask what you should do, because you end up doing nothing. They're so cautious, So I used to tell the lawyers, your job is to get me out of trouble. I'll do what I want. And when I get into trouble, get me out of it, Then, we used to have these non-disclosure agreements. Because when you're meeting people, and they had 10 pages of non-disclosure. I said, for goodness sake, you have a 1-hour meeting, 10 pages, how are you going to function? Can you give me the 1-page version of this? Initially they resisted, So I said, otherwise we can't operate. Eventually they did, something like that, which they themselves were very proud of, because it had the essence of all the 10 pages, and yet something that you could, easily look at in reasonable time. The other thing that I also learned from the lawyers was that they always used to say that if you must go to court, you have already lost. So whatever you do, try and stay away from court. So that's another thing that stuck, with me. It's always better to find a way to negotiate, and get a settlement. Next, please. So in BCN, the backbone connectivity network, living in Nigeria, I lived in Nigeria for 4 years in Abuja, and that in itself was quite an experience, because, I like Nigerians because they don't take no for an answer. To a Nigerian, nothing is impossible. In fact, they'll come and say, Oga, I will get it done tomorrow. 2 years later, he's standing in front of you with a straight face and still saying, Oga, I will get it done tomorrow. So I put a sign on my desk, I will get it done tomorrow. And I used to say that in Nigeria, objects in your rear view mirror are always much farther away than they appear. So anyway, but the thing that I like about them, again, you can't tell but contrast. Ghanaians are very cautious. Nigerians, I mean, they throw caution to the wind. And in fact, when I first went, they used to tease me all the time. You Ghanaians, somebody go chop 50,000 of that your money, you call them CD or something, you go kill them. That's what Nigeria will go chop budget. Chop the whole budget. And I thought they were kidding. But those state governors, literally, they chop budget. And I mean the attitude, is something else. In fact, they had a case where one of these political godfathers, GhIE, on national TV, he had sponsored this governor of Oyo State. And I guess the guy ran afoul of him. So he actively pursued him until they chased him out of office. So he was being interviewed on national TV. He said, Alhaji, why are you so upset about Governor Ladoja? He looked at them and said, oh, that Ladoja, he's a greedy man. He's a very greedy man. We agreed to share the money 50-50. He didn't pay. Even Obasanjo intervened. I reduced it for him. He still didn't pay. What do you want me to do? This is on national TV. This is on national TV. And you look at him and say, what world am I in? And that sort of, attitude. I mean, it's just, Then one of their governors was being accused of nepotism. He had surrounded himself with, family and friends. And that's something else. So he himself called a press conference, and he invited everybody. And he said, all those things that you people have been complaining about, they are all true. And I'm going to continue doing the same thing. You don't expect me to run this place with my enemies. I mean, that is but anyway, I think if we could find some combination of the Nigerian chutzpah and then the Ghanaian, we tend to pay attention to detail and stuff like that. I think Africa would go, very far. I mean, but Ghanaians, we are overly cautious. You're telling something to a Ghanaian, and before you finish the first sentence, they give you 10 reasons why it will not work. You tell a Nigerian, and he's constantly asking you, oh, how can we make it bigger? How can we, So it's a different mindset, and I think we need some combination of that to be able to, move forward. Next one. This is the kind of network we're looking at to build in Nigeria on BCN. Go to the next one. In fact, our goal was, first, I mean, we do have this, build a ring around Abuja, do a metro network around Abuja, and then go to the next, then build rings in other parts of Nigeria, but the focus was the north, because at that time, the north didn't have as much infrastructure. And the thinking was that if we're able to do that, that the MTNs and so on coming up there, they would have to deal with us. But again, I mean, the story, the people didn't want to invest, they didn't want to put money in the business, and so. But the company is still going. Next one, eco-informatics. The eco-informatics, really our goal is okay. The goal is to do ICT a little differently. Not so much to be building ICT networks or dealing with the ICT manager, but rather deal with the executive management. People who are concerned about what is the return on investment for what we put into technology. That's our target, audience, as opposed to, I mean, we would do the ICT manager who wants to build his network and so on and so forth. But more importantly, the executive manager and the board which is interested in all this money that we are spending. What are we getting for it? And also trying to understand how is technology impacting my business. So that is the level at which we try to operate. Next one. Next one. Finally, what I call service to professional to the profession and society. I've served on the public boards and I continue to. Way back, there used to be a data processing control. When I used to teach at Legon, which I chaired. I served as a consultant to DRA board. They were looking at how do they turn their fiber into telecom business and so on. I served on the U.S. Federal Communications Commission Technological Advisory Council. There was a Florida Research Council, which was trying to bring business into Florida. I served on that council. Then educational institutions. Interestingly, I was the person who introduced the Ghana universities to strategic planning. The first one was at Legon. In fact, Legon was the first to do, strategic planning. And the way it came about was Professor Bene, who taught me, at Achimota School and became my colleague when I was at Legon. I was visiting, went to visit to talk to him. And he was asking me, and I said, one of the things I do is strategic planning. And he said, oh, is that right? These days, every place I go to, people, talk about it. So please come and tell me about it. So he cleared his calendar. We spent a day, and I took him through all of that. And he said, we will do it for Legon. I'll figure out a way to fund it. So, and I think he applied for some, So there was this American, the funding required an American. So I teamed up with this American, and we did the first strategic plan for Legon. And in fact, Professor Ivan Adai-Mensah swears by it because he was the chairman of the committee. And the reason why Bene made him, a chairman was because he didn't believe in it. He didn't believe in it, but he was swear that that's what made him a good vice chancellor. So when he became vice chancellor, he really understood what needed to be done at Legon. Similarly, I did one at KNUST. And in fact, was it last year or the year before, when I went, the mission and vision that we developed, they were still on, in the council chamber. So it had endured the test of time. And when Japan was at UCC, he also asked me, so all the strategic plans for the major universities, I was involved with them. And then, of course, I served on many industry advisory boards when I was at Harris, for various universities. Now, to GhIE, I used to be on the council of GhIE before I went back to the US. This was in the 80s, but then, got lost, essentially. And at the time, I was the chair of the Programs and Welfare Committee, but I lost all of that when I went back, So when I returned to Ghana, when I came to teach at Legon, that's when I did, my first part, all this stuff that I'm talking about. When because of people like Engineer Sariabua and so on, that they were my friends. So I always kept in touch with the GhIE. So when I came back, naturally, my interest in the GhIE was there. And I believe that initially, maybe saw me as a bit of an outsider. I think, and in fact, the first time I ran for president, I lost. I lost by 2 votes, and I lost. But, it's always been in my heart, because you have to, the profession has to win. Otherwise, all of us will lose. And there were some things I felt quite strongly about. For example, without meaning to sound immodest, I think the current constitution is really, in a sense, my baby. Because the ideas behind the constitution, I pushed for it, persuaded my good old friend, Engineer Sarabua, to be the chairman of the constitution, because at the time, I wasn't a past president. I needed a past president. So, we worked together and got the constitution. And with Engineer Hesse too was instrumental, because he's a good, drafts person for constitutions and stuff like that. So that's how, because the fundamental thing was to break the thinking that this was kind of a club for professionals. It was difficult to persuade people that let us open it up to the other occupational groups, and to me, it was obvious, because number one, you cannot practice engineering when those people are not effectively being deployed. And more importantly, there are many more of them than there are of us. And anytime you deal with government, it's numbers. So if you don't find a way to bring them in and let them be your partners, guess what? They will throw you off, eventually. But fortunately, we were able to persuade the council at the time. And I think we have a very good, constitution, even though, of course, there are some things which need to be looked at. And so when it came to the review, the council called me, and said, come help us review. So I do spend quite a bit of time with the institution, and I'm very liberal with my time for the institution. And then also the FIO, Federation of African, pretty liberal with my time, because I strongly believe in the profession. Very, very, because this is a profession that has made me, and I need, to give, something back. Next, please. Now, finally, let's go to the lessons learned, And I would take the lessons learned. Please, the next one. First, I'll talk about the technology framework. And these are some of the things that I have learned. Okay. One is the whole concept of value addition. And this probably relates more to electrical engineering than the others, but I think it is also very relevant to the others. Typically, most of the engineering, you take a set of technologies, know-how, processes, and you convert that to a service or you convert that to a product. In between, there are levels of things that you do. So, for example, the core technology, you've got to look at the core technology. Then the components. And then these components become systems, and the systems become total solutions. You need to understand that chain and ask yourself, where is the best place for me to add value? So this is one of the things that I think when you are practicing engineering, you need to look at. So either at the capabilities end, either at the capabilities end or at the customer or the market end, or somewhere in between. Where do you add value? So this is one of the things. Next one, please. The other thing that I've also learned is the concept of the ecosystem and industry structure. Whenever you get into any area, ask yourself, do I understand the ecosystem? And do I understand the industry structure? Very, very important. Okay. So, for example, in the ICT area, you have policymakers, you have regulators, you have operators, you have application and value-added providers, you have technology providers, service users, and associations. And all of these people have to come together to make the industry work. And the thing is that If the industry doesn't work, it doesn't matter if you are the greatest player in that industry, you will lose. So we all have to make sure that it's a vibrant industry, and then we compete within that industry. And this is what an understanding of the ecosystem and the industry structure allows you to do. Next one, please. Then there is what I call the meta trends and the eigenfactors. Anytime you approach a problem, you ask yourself, what are the fundamental things driving, this problem? It's almost like the concept of eigenvectors. If you can define eigenvectors, you can define the space. Any point in the space can be defined relative to the eigenvectors. It is a similar concept. In telecoms, there are three main, what I call eigenfactors: the application, the technology, and the environment. Okay. Clearly, if there's a new application, you have an opportunity to add value. And things can change. So when you go from maybe using what's a good example? When you go from using desktop to a mobile phone, okay, all those applications will change. Okay, the spreadsheet that I use, now all of a sudden, instead of doing all these calculations and so on and so forth, now I can do it very fast. Okay. Then the technology. Clearly, as technology improves, things change. And you'll be amazed how many companies have gone out of business because of the technology. A good example is Kodak. Kodak used to be the giant in photography. But Kodak was essentially a chemistry company. Okay? And most of their executives were chemists. And never realized that. So when signal processing was coming along, and typically when the things start, they are crude, so you can dismiss it. And they say, oh, anything you can do with signal processing, you can do just as well, if not better, with chemistry. What they didn't realize that the cost curve was completely different. And as microelectronics, advanced, they put them out of business. And before they realized, they were history. Similarly, with computing. When I started my career, we used to have mainframe computers. Every organization had one. And we used to carry these boxes, hollery, cards, and so on and so forth. There's a company called Digital Equipment Corporation, DEC. They correctly figured out that if they could find a way so that every department within the company would have its own computer, instead of the whole enterprise having only one computer, this is something that would sell. And indeed, it sold a lot. But interestingly, that same company could not envision that if the department could have its own computer, why not the individual? So they did not invest. And before they realized, it was too late. And the principle that you see is that a lot of companies, their success spells their doom. Because most of the time, your sales force will tell you that instead of spending money on all this speculative stuff, if you give me more money, I can sell more of what we have today. Yes, you will, but tomorrow you won't be around. So in fact, in my career, one of the things that I always tried to do was that within engineering, we would have a group whose mission was to put us out of business. Because it is better for you to bypass yourself than to allow somebody else to bypass you. but it's a very difficult thing to do, particularly in times of, hardship. People will tell you, these people are dreamers and so on. We need money today. What's all this? But if you don't do that, your future will definitely be, in danger. Then the environment, and the environment, particularly regulation. And I already indicated to you that the telecom industry is what it is today, not so much because of technology, even though there have been a lot of technology, not so much because of new applications, but fundamentally because of regulation. The fact that they broke AT&T up, that opened up the industry to all kinds of innovation. Because I remember when I was at AT&T, AT&T used to fight anybody who wanted to plug anything into the network. And in fact, their whole thinking was that you put all the intelligence in the network and make the endpoints dumb. And people were fighting back and saying, no, we can make the endpoint intelligent and reduce, the intelligence. So that battle went on. And really, what the breakup of AT&T did was to say that that battle was won by the people who were looking at the endpoint. Because IP and all that kind of networking depends on the fact that you have intelligent endpoints. Take a look at, recently, COVID. Look at when there was a regulation that you must have a test when you enter Ghana. It created an opportunity for business. When the decision was made that you no longer need to, that business is gone. It's regulation, it's the impact of regulation, something that we tend not to pay as much attention to. But a lot of things happen because of regulation. The point here is that anytime you approach a problem, ask yourself, what are the eigenfactors? Can I determine the eigenfactors? Because if you can determine the eigenfactors, then basically you can stitch together the solution eventually. Next, please. The other final one is what I call the concept of zones of advantage. And what this says is that very rarely will you find a technology that spans the whole space. Generally, every technology has a zone of advantage. And then when you leave that zone, something else works. So you need to understand, how do I stitch together these different zones of advantage to produce a solution? So an optimal solution consists of these zones of advantage, and you need to understand where they are. Okay. Then what I call the technology cycle. And again, this is particularly so in electrical engineering. And what that says is that what is a whole system today becomes a standalone box the next day. It becomes a card that goes into that box. It becomes a chip that goes into that card. And then it goes into software. And that cycle continues. And that is the reason, that's really what has driven the cost curve of many of these things, so that we have this, cell phone. And this cell phone has much more power, much more capability than all the computers which were on campus, which used to occupy huge buildings. When I was a student, this thing has infinitely more power than that. And it is because of this technology cycle. Then the other thing that we see is that a lot of things are being driven by digitization. Digitization and this microelectronics principle. And what we're also seeing is that as time goes on, networking becomes to either be wireless or it's going to be fiber. Because if you need bandwidth, go to fiber. Now, where the medium, if you need mobility, it's got to be wireless. Wireless by its very nature has some limitations, So I believe that the whole world is going to become what I call wire optics, either wireless or it's going to be optics. So that's what the trend for the future is going to be. And the internet, everywhere you go, the internet, and the internet goes together with IP, which is the internet, protocol. And people are investing so much in this area, in data networking, in all this stuff that, you can't fight it. So anytime you come to a solution, you come to develop a solution, ask yourself, where is the internet going? Can I take advantage of it? Where is the technology cycle? The product that I have, where is it on the technology cycle? In future, where is it going to be? So you got to think about all of these things in order to be able to fashion a good solution. Now let's look at the tips on a successful, please, next one. Oh, you didn't show the slide. I should have looked at it. Okay. First, to have a successful career, you must develop the so-called soft skills, these 21st century capabilities, creativity and innovation, critical thinking and problem solving, communication, collaboration, information literacy, and so on and so on. So there are some basic capabilities that you need to have for a successful career. The next one. Then there's a certain foundation that you must build. And you must have a strong technical background if you're going to be successful in engineering. It goes without saying. If you don't have a successful, strong, but you won't survive in engineering. And it's good to have general interest, but you must be a specialist in one area, in some area. People must come to you for something. You need to build credibility among your peers. They ought to be able to say, Mr. Nyante is an expert in this area, even though he knows a lot. But if I want this, he's the go-to person. So you want to be in that position. You have to develop curiosity. You have to ask questions. Don't be shy to ask questions. And the thing that I also find is that particularly young engineers, they are afraid to approximate. Approximation is a key part of engineering. You don't have to be exact. Approximate and then improve. Go through another cycle, and you improve and so on. But all depends on your confidence in using approximation. And then trust your instincts. Okay. And in fact, as you become more and more experienced as an engineer, the difference is the fact that you trust your instincts. You look at something and say, no, this is wrong. You don't have to solve all those equations. You can just tell immediately that there's something wrong with this. Now, in the course of the practice, you have to take advantage of training opportunities because the field is changing. And if you stay still, you are dying, in the field. And the beauty of engineering is that it has a lot of flexibility, And in fact, I used to recruit, I think I indicated, I used to recruit, and when I went to a school, and I tell the kids that if you're good in math and science, don't bother to do anything else. Do engineering. Why? Because after engineering, you can do just about anything. You can decide to go to medical school. You can decide to do law. You can do an MBA. And in fact, you can even be able, in fact, I remember when I was at Columbia, the head of psychology started as an engineer. because he had the analytical skills. Psychology is these days no longer storytelling. You've got to do some computations and stuff like that. And that whole process of being able to analyze problems, defining problems, and solving the problems using pieces, what we call systems engineering. That, if we're equipped with that, you can apply it in so many places. So the best doctors would be those who started as engineers. And as I'm going to show, the best politicians should be the ones who started out as engineers. Anyway, and whatever you do, excellence must be part of you. Don't never accept mediocrity. And I think as a nation, this is one of our problems. I think we far too easily accept mediocrity. And if you're afraid of working long hours, don't come close to engineering. Next, please. And in that connection, please always be mindful of the objective of the GhIE. And what does the GhIE objective say? To promote and advance the science and practice of engineering to the benefit of society in Ghana and Africa and globally. If you keep that in mind, you do the right thing. And the engineering career is a long journey, that must be traveled throughout your life. And as I have said before, there are really sort of these 4 stages of knowledge. When you start pursuing something, you are in the state of unconscious competence, meaning you don't even know that you don't know. That's a pretty, ironically, actually, you're happy there because you don't know that you don't know. Then something happens and you do something about your incompetence and you move to the state of conscious incompetence. Well, then at least you know that you don't know. And if you know that you don't know, obviously you will seek the steps to go to the next step. The next step is a state of conscious competence, which means you have to keep working hard. You have to keep trying, to be good, because it doesn't come naturally to you. And in fact, we are all in our classes, people who used to have to work so hard, now the ultimate stage is you want to be in the state of unconscious competence, meaning it just comes naturally to you. You don't even have to think about it. You see it in your sleep. You see it in your dream. It has become second nature to you. So as we move through our career, we want to get to that state of unconscious competence. That should be our goal. Also, what we find is that engineering is increasingly a team activity. Multiple disciplines come together, to fashion a solution that these days it is not just narrow. Need to bring, different disciplines together. And that mechanism also helps to do what I call transformation from individual excellence to group excellence. In fact, in Africa, I submit that our biggest problem is that we have individual excellence, but group incompetence. And any area that you pick, you find one of us who is great. But let's face it, when you come, we are not doing well. As a group, we are not doing well. So clearly, we have group incompetence. And one of the challenges is how do we translate our individual excellence to group competence? And it is by building, stronger institutions, by collaborating, and so on. And that should be an objective that we set, for ourselves. And if you're going to have national development, you cannot do, without that. We have to pay attention to professional practice and ethics. You cannot, survive for too long if you don't have ethics. Fortunately for engineering, you may not be the richest person on earth, but you won't starve. It's a profession, So, and because of that, it at least gives you the strength, to practice ethics. When you are out and starving, it's very difficult, to hold on to, ethics. But I think we are in a profession where, it's unlikely that you will starve. You may not be very rich, but you will not starve. And if we don't have ethics, nothing else matters. And in fact, what we find is that as a profession, the GhIE, it really rests largely on the integrity of the individual. And if one, engineering practitioner fails, it affects all of us. In fact, when people are walking and they see these potholes, they don't say, Kwesi or Kwaku. They say, oh, what's wrong with these engineers? So it affects, all of us. The next thing is become an engineering evangelist. I think we should all be evangelists. And in your community, first, make sure that you are not just a passive member of the engineering community. You should participate in what is going on. Try to gain leadership wherever you are. And have to actively promote, the need for engineering and technology. Because frankly, until we get to the point where we start applying engineering technology to our problems, we are going nowhere. The country is not going to go anywhere. The continent is not going to go anywhere. So we need to infuse, engineering and technology. And this has to be in all aspects of our life. So we need to ensure that at the district assembly level, at the municipal assembly level, at the national level, in cabinet, in parliament, even in the judiciary, we have, engineers and engineering trained people, in those areas of. And frankly, as I said before, the difference between us and the countries which seem to have made it is because they have much more effectively utilized, engineering. And I think we are capable, of doing, that. Strive to be a leader in your community and the country at large. Again, if you look at, China, which has become quite successful, at the time, 8 out of their top 9 leaders, they were engineers. What is even more impressive is that the typical mayor in China is an engineer. So it's not just the top, at all the different levels. And in fact, in China, if you want to be a politician or you want to be in public service, you better study engineering, not law. And we should not be shy of becoming part of the political process. And as I said, we should aim to be in cabinet, parliament, municipal and district assemblies, particularly for the young ones. For the young ones, consciously think of how do I influence, the direction of the country. And you cannot influence the direction of the country by merely solving differential equations and triple integrals. You got to be where the decisions are made. And in fact, the analytical skills that you bring, wherever you go, you will shine. And I urge all of us, to take that mantle up. And I strongly believe that it doesn't matter whether you are in party A or party X. Once you are an engineering practitioner, you'll be a much better leader. Okay. So now time for some concluding remarks. I think I've talked a lot, but let me try to, round up. As I said, I've been in this profession for about 45 years. and I've been privileged to have been exposed to a wide-ranging career. I've been an individual contributor. I have moved into executive management, where I have, mentored, supervised, encouraged, and even fired, other engineers. I have transitioned from what I call solving partial differential equations and triple integrals to delving into, the financial and market analysis and corporate governance. So that's, so I've, traveled the whole range. And, I've also transitioned from what I call the exuberant fountain of youth, where, every problem can be solved. I have such a, when I was a fearsome foursome, there was no problem that I could not, solve. And life was very well defined. You analyze and you solve. Presently, I think I'm a little more chastened, considerably more chastened. And you learn that there's a lot that you do. You become essentially your biggest critic. And I've been fortunate to learn, sometimes painfully, a few lessons about the profession. And I've developed some very distinct perspectives. And some of these are, I've come to the strong conclusion that most development problems are essentially engineering problems. I mean, look at health, malaria. You can either provide pharmaceuticals to cure or go back to the basics and solve the drainage problem. It's an engineering problem. But that's, a much longer lasting, it's a sustainable solution than giving medications to people. There are so many of these things which we need to think about. And that no nation, and I don't know of any, that can develop without indigenous engineering practitioners. It is not enough to have, engineering practitioners, but they must be indigenous. Because nobody is going to solve your problem for you. We have to solve our own, problems. And as I said, engineering has been and continues to be the backbone for the development and progress of any country. And Ghana is no exception. And finally, I believe that Ghana, our dear nation, is going nowhere without engineering practitioners. So let us all come together, help to put us on a better footing, because we have a special responsibility to the nation. Without us, the nation can't make it. I don't care what the lawyers say. I don't care what those politicians say. Without engineering, this country is going nowhere. And again, let me emphasize, we are going nowhere without engineering. Thank you. And if there are any questions, quite well.
Wow. This is the next step. And I believe that we all agree sharing this time with Dr. Boakye. Shall we please give a hand for I now learned so much. And I believe that whether you are here with us or online, we had about 100 people online. And I believe there's about 20 people online, and they are still there. And I believe we all had a good opportunity to learn so much. We'll be getting to the questions, but I think I need to acknowledge a few people who have shared the evening with the electrical engineering division. Interestingly, they are also engineers. We have our past president, engineer Alex Ayer, with us.
GhIE pass.
We have our president-elect engineer Kwame Boakye with us. Then we have our, let me use that this way, the practical executive
Director.
We are very grateful for the time. We'll take a few questions there. I think the big substance of it has been shared, and I think we've all absorbed so much. But if there are a few questions, I don't know, first from the audience, you came all the way, so I'll give you the first option. If you have any questions that you want to ask. Interestingly, this is a Cameroonian, the gentleman in 48. I actually met him when he came, and he said he follows the institution on our website. So when he saw the program, then he came in. So I'm not sure if he's going to, I spoke a bit of French, but I don't know if he speaks English or French. So okay.
Good evening to all. Thank you for giving me this invitation on this issue. I want to ask you, Dr. Thank you for the presentation. My question is that, do you think that the environment of Ghana is proposed to develop
I think he's asking that
Well,
whether if the environment in Ghana is suitable for the development of engineering.
we don't have a choice. We don't have a choice. We will have to make it suitable, because we cannot commit generation after generation, to poverty, illiteracy, and in fact, it's not just Ghana, it's all of Africa. I mean, look at Africa is the richest continent, has all these minerals, and yet we are the poorest. Makes no sense whatsoever. That kind of paradox has to be broken. And if that means, and we, the engineering practitioners, cannot sit, I think we have been too passive. We need to become a lot more active, in trying to change the environment. It's not going to happen overnight, but I think we have to set goals and move forward. So your question is not just for Ghana, but actually it is for the whole continent. It's almost like we work on gold, but we don't have the capability to dig underneath the earth and reap a lot more. So constantly we are faced with the shortages, the privations, and it doesn't make any sense at all.
Thank you very much.
You have-
Just a few of the comments you are getting online. Good presentation, and thank you so much, Doctor. Very insightful from Saman Asari. God bless you more, Dr. Hilary Papa. There is nothing refreshing like this fine woman. Indeed, you are an engineer doctor by all standards. Thanks, a very enlightening and inspiring presentation. Thanks, Doctor. From Danladi, that's very insightful and guiding. Any more questions? Yes, please.
I think my question is for engineering. I wish I could have come to you privately, but for the purpose of this gathering, I want to ask, in case someone, maybe the society or the community he has found out that if you go to the technical school, the TPEC, it will have come with you. You are advised to invest in the procedure to follow. Should you go to the DC or whatever, or operations? Do you have any advice for that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I am a strong believer in collaboration. Okay, I mean, the environment will dictate to some extent what the strategy is. If you happen to be maybe, the friend or brother of the DC, you may take one approach. If you're just starting cold, you may want to build some alliances. Maybe get the institution, for example, interested in supporting you in what you want to do. Usually you can go much farther than if you just do it by yourself. The more support you have from others and the bigger the coalition that you bring, the greater the probability of success. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, I have that. How to do. If I may be practical, I'm at a people.
Okay.
And I realized that there is no technical school in that technical.
Okay.
I realized that if we put out the technical school,
Okay.
to feed the organization,
Okay.
but also impacting the community.
Okay.
And, for the land is not issue. And I've spoken to the assembly members to have the same issue. But how to?
But have you spoken within GhIE itself? Have you discussed that? So the GhIE becomes the much better here, because this is going to tell we don't have money. That's the first thing. But quite often the problem is not money; it's really more imagination. So if you can build something, a support, engineering community, I think you have a much better chance of succeeding.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Oscar. I'm from the mechanical industry. They decided to walk away from their brothers.
Okay.
I'm always at the German.
Okay.
And sometimes when you go to these machine shops, you see people who have not been to school. You meet people in the machine shop who are not like well educated like someone. But the engineering that they practice, it's unbelievable. And I always ask myself, how do we bring these people on board? Because in Ghana here, one thing that sometimes it's so painful is you see people in the engineering field, and the only chance that you have after school is national service. You see them end up going to that in a way it helps them to do well, but not related to the career. Yeah. So my question is, how do we bring this on?
In fact, that was the whole thrust behind the new constitution. To try to find a way to bring in these artisans, so that we can have, training programs for them, help, them organize better, and so on, And I think the institution can do a lot about that. So my hope is that now that we have made the technologists, the technicians, and then the artisans members of the institution, we can better organize those.
Thank you very much. We will just three questions for we'll take that without. So the first one how do we incorporate the value importance of learning from failure in the education of children? Any specific tips and ideas?
Yeah. In fact, there's a saying that if you have never failed, then you haven't tried hard enough. Because if you keep pushing, you get to a point where you fail and you learn from your failure. Now, in Ghana, our culture generally does not encourage, experimentation, and part of it, has to do with I mean, we really don't revere science. It's always, don't do this because some spirit will catch you, or, some, stuff like that, I think slowly that is changing, and we need to encourage that in our schools. And, the whole idea of the critical thinking, which we are increasingly emphasizing, will help, to, break that. In fact, I didn't say it, but when I first went to Colombia, one of the things that I found out was that, we're in sixth form, we had done all these things, but we had never done a project. A project that you will sit down, actually formulate, write a report. We had never done that. I mean, as good as these kids were, we just hadn't done that. And I think that kind of training to encourage, our young ones, In fact, I remember when my kids started school, at the nursery, they have what they call show and tell. Meaning, you bring something, you stand in front of the group and talk about what it is. So at a very early age, they are being trained to think for themselves. And I think we need more and more, of that. Whereas in Ghana, traditionally, they say, you elders are here and you're busy blabbing off your mouth. Shut up, I mean, now, of course, on the other side, sometimes you see these impudent little kids, So, but I believe there's a balance somewhere which we can strike. Yeah.
Next question, you said, based on your experience, what, in your opinion, is a reasonable duration for each of the various stages of an engineering career?
In fact, my rule of thumb that I developed over a period of time was that every 4 or 5 years, you must change what you do. Every 4 or 5 years, you must change what you do. It doesn't mean you have to change companies. In fact, in a large company, you can be doing something very different, within that company. Otherwise, the assignments, so for example, in a consulting company, maybe you're doing roads today. What if you're thinking of doing something a little bit different? And when you go to a new job, always 2 things. You bring the expertise that you have from the previous one to apply to this new area. Almost invariably, you find that you can do that. That you can bring the old expertise to expand in the new area. And that generally allows you to expand, your horizon. And in some places, in Ghana, the job market is tough. For example, places like the US, every 4 or 5 years, either you rise, you go to a new assignment to learn new things, or you quit the company and move on to something else. So, but in Ghana, it's a lot tougher to do that because you don't have the same opportunities.
Okay. This question is a political question. What are your thoughts for a suggestion to mobilize engineering practitioners to help the first GhIE executive director to be presidential candidate for primaries?
Well, I mean, wait.
I am going to be on a match now
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that, as I said, we would encourage engineering practitioners, we support engineering practitioners, but not in a partisan, manner. Yeah, I mean, that's certainly, I mean, we'll look at what he has to offer and so on, and yeah,
Right.
I certainly am not going to be his campaign manager. Yes, sir. Huh? You're campaigning for it. That's good. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I can't have enough ways to thank you, Doctor, for the time. Of course, the content shows that you put a lot of hours into doing this. And we are so grateful for all the work that you put in to give us such another presentation. And I think the question has been whether if we can get copies of the slides.
Yes, actually.
It's something that we will share.
Yeah.
And for us in the electrical engineering division, we have created a forum that we can continue to share some of these things. The questions that were not answered, we are going to place them on that forum, and we will get Doctor to give his answers to them.
Okay.
A forum under our website. So we'll do that, put the questions there, and then we'll get Doctor to answer them so that all that you've asked will be answered. So once again, thank you very much, Doctor. Thank you very much, all of us, for being there with us. You've actually been patient to spend the time with us. We are so grateful. There are some more seminars that will be coming up.
Yes.
They're coming up there. As we have them, please make yourself able to continue to share this knowledge and the experiences that you've had.
And Chairman, those online.
Yes. I will get that.
Yes, I was saying, please acknowledge those online.
Yes.
Whatever is going on, we must be part of it, okay?
Also online.
That's right. Whatever you are sharing, the bookie, don't forget us.
The communication with Ghana. I know the first time. So and a lot more, and then engineer the AJ.
Yes.
I think I saw
That's right.
the AJ also online. And all of you online, the senior ones, the fellows, the senior members, all of you, we acknowledge you and thank you so much for your presence. So,
And I forgot to add that I'm a family man.
Well, thank you very much.
A wife and 4 kids.
Yes. Thank you very much. Thanks for doing that.
Sure.
For all that we shared at the time. We pray that as we go, we all arrive safely. And God will be for all of us. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much. There's some event picture. Please come up. Help me for the ladies again. One picture. Doctor. Yeah. Madam, that's okay. Don't worry. It's nice of you. Please enjoy yourself. Very